You ever stop to think that what happens inside your own home, the daily routines, the arguments, the moments of support, might actually be shaped by forces way, way bigger than your family? Well, today we're going to dig into a pretty wild theory that suggests our family life is secretly a key ingredient for the entire economy.
I mean, we've all been there, right? You come home totally drained after a long, frustrating day. Maybe your boss was a jerk, or you're just feeling completely powerless, exhausted, and underpaid.
All that frustration, all that anger and stress, it's got to go somewhere. But what happens to it? You can't exactly scream at your boss and expect to keep your job. So when you clock out for the day, where does all that pressure actually go?
All right, so let's get into it. Back in the 1970s, a sociologist came up with a pretty radical answer to that exact question. And her answer puts the family right at the heart of the whole economic system.
Meet Fran Ansley. What she did was really interesting. She took two huge ideas, Marxism, which critiques capitalism, and feminism, which critiques patriarchy, and smashed them together. She argued that the family isn't some cozy little bubble separate from the rest of the world. Nope. She said it's a vital piece of the machine that keeps capitalism running, especially when the system is pretty unfair to its workers.
So how on earth does the family manage to do that? Well, Ansley's entire theory really boils down to this one powerful metaphor: the family as a secret safety valve.
Okay, so here's the big idea. When workers feel angry, exploited, and just plain fed up, they might, band together and demand some major changes, maybe even start a revolution. But Ansley says that's where the family comes in. It absorbs all that anger. It lets workers let off steam at home so they don't challenge the very system that's making them miserable in the first place.
And this is where her analogy gets really clever. She wants us to picture the entire workforce as a giant steam engine, constantly building up pressure from all the exploitation. Without some way to release that pressure, the whole thing would just explode. And for Ansley, the family is that release valve. The worker comes home, gets some comfort, and calms down. Just enough so they're ready to go back to work the next day without putting up a fight.
And she put it pretty bluntly herself. This soft place to land isn't just about feeling better, it's deeply political. It basically neutralizes rebellion. But this service isn't free. Someone has to pay the price for all this stability.
And this is where the feminist part of her Marxist feminist theory really kicks in. It reveals the hidden cost of keeping the system stable, a cost that she argued was paid almost entirely by women.
Just look at this. For decades, this was the dream that society was sold: the happy housewife, smiling in her perfect kitchen. It wasn't just a place to cook, it was a show place. This was the comforting, picture-perfect idea of what family life was supposed to be. But Ansley and other Marxist feminists looked at this image and asked a very different question. Is it really a showplace, or is it a trap?
They would argue it's a trap, and here's why. The woman in this traditional role, the housewife, is the one providing all that emotional support. She is the one who has to absorb her husband's stress, keep the home running, and raise the next generation of workers. And she does all of this for free. No paycheck. This unpaid work is absolutely essential for the economy, but it leaves her totally dependent financially, and often pretty powerless.
Now, obviously that was the 1970s. So the big question is, how does a theory like this hold up today in a world that looks so different?
So it's really important to know that Ansley wasn't the only one thinking about this. There was another group of sociologists called functionalists who saw the exact same thing happening. They called the family a warm bath that soothed the worker. They thought this was a great thing that helped all of society stay stable and harmonious. But Ansley looked at that same warm bath and called it a safety valve that only helped the bosses by preventing workers from fighting back. So they're describing the same process, but they come to totally opposite conclusions about who it really benefits.
Of course, like any big theory, this one has its pros and cons. On the one hand, it was huge for shining a light on all the hidden emotional work that women do, and for connecting our private lives to the public economy. But on the other hand, critics say it's a little outdated. I mean, it assumes a very traditional nuclear family, and maybe it doesn't give women enough credit for pushing back against these roles. And the really big question today is, what happens when both partners are out there working stressful jobs?
So, to just boil it all down, Fran Ansley's core argument is that this cozy idea of the family being a private escape from the world is basically an illusion. In her view, it's a fundamental part of the economy, a pillar holding the whole system up, and it's built on the invisible, unpaid work of women.
And that leaves us with a final, really big thought for today. If women are now in the workforce facing all the same stresses as men, but they're still often doing most of the housework and the emotional labor, what happens then? Who's absorbing all the pressure? Maybe the family isn't a safety valve anymore. Maybe it's become its own kind of pressure cooker. What do you think?